Didn't you have any good outfit for today? Pathetic like your mother.
This venue is impressive. Indeed, quite the event. What's going on there?
Let's add some spice to drama. I'm bored.
Who made her cry? I've no mercy for that person.
The ballroom smelled like money and fresh flowers, and Wren Calloway was already behind on 3 tasks before she even made it through the door. She had the guest list in one hand and a small clipboard in the other, and she was wearing the pale blue dress she'd bought 2 years ago for her college graduation, the only formal thing she owned that still fit right. It wasn't glamorous, but it was clean, pressed, and she had taken time with it. She had felt almost okay standing in front of the mirror back at the house. That feeling didn't survive the entrance. Pamela saw her the moment she walked in. Not because Wren was loud or late or drawing any kind of attention, but because Pamela always saw Wren. She had a talent for it, the way certain people have a talent for finding the one loose thread in an otherwise perfect seam. She was standing near the entrance with 2 women Wren didn't recognize, both of them dressed in the kind of effortless black that suggested personal stylists and zero hesitation. Pamela herself was in deep burgundy, hair swept up, every inch of her arranged for exactly this kind of room. She turned as Wren approached, and her smile arrived a half-second before her voice, which was always how it went. Wren. She said the name the way you'd say a mild inconvenience. Why did you wear this ugly dress? The 2 women glanced over. One of them tilted her head slightly. Wren kept her expression still. I thought it was appropriate for the occasion. Pamela laughed, soft, dismissive, designed to land on the women beside her and not on Wren. It's Brooke's engagement party, sweetheart. Not a work luncheon. She reached out and adjusted the collar of Wren's dress with 2 fingers, the gesture practiced and maternal and entirely for show. Go check on the catering station. They were short 2 servers when I arrived and I cannot have empty trays circulating during cocktail hour. She was already turning back to the women before she finished the sentence. Wren nodded once. She walked away from the entrance, deeper into the ballroom, and she didn't look back. She had stopped looking back at Pamela a long time ago. The party was beautiful if she was being honest about it. The hotel ballroom had been taken over entirely. White florals everywhere, warm lighting, the kind of setup that cost more than Wren's monthly living allowance, which Pamela controlled and distributed with the particular generosity of someone who knew exactly what dependency felt like and had decided to enjoy it. Round tables were draped in ivory linen. A string quartet played near the far wall. Brooke stood in the center of it all in a gown that probably had its own garment bag and its own travel itinerary, laughing at something her fiancé had just said, her hand on his arm, her whole life arranged perfectly around her. Wren found the catering station. She spent the next 40 minutes doing things no guest should be doing at a party they were technically listed as attending. She tracked down the missing server. She confirmed the dietary table placement with the venue coordinator. She carried a tray from the kitchen to the main floor because one of the actual staff had stepped away. She did all of this quietly, efficiently, and with the specific invisibility she had spent years perfecting inside Pamela's house. She was refilling a champagne station near the east wall when she first noticed the shift in the room. It wasn't loud. It wasn't announced. But something changed in the quality of the air near the entrance, the way a room changes when someone walks in who everyone already knows something about, even if they couldn't explain what. Conversations didn't stop, they just slowed, briefly, and heads turned the way they do when the turn feels involuntary. The man who had caused it was already moving past the entrance. He was tall, and dressed well in the particular way that suggested the clothes had been chosen with complete indifference to impressing anyone in this specific room. Dark jacket, no tie, something unhurried in the way he moved through the space, like he had already decided this evening would be mildly tolerable at best. He had the kind of face that looked like it had made up its mind about most things. He said something to the man beside him, shorter, quieter, watchful, without turning his head, and the other man nodded once and peeled away. Wren watched him for maybe 4 seconds. Then she went back to the champagne. His name was Reid Maddox, though she didn't know that yet. Reid knew Brooke's fiancé's family the way he knew most people in rooms like this one, through business that didn't require friendship, conducted through intermediaries who handled the paperwork so no one's name appeared anywhere inconvenient. He had come tonight partly because declining would have required an explanation he didn't feel like giving, and partly because one of the fiancé's uncles had been making moves in a territory that Reid was watching with some patience and some interest. He had been here for 11 minutes and he was already bored. He accepted a drink from a passing tray, surveyed the room, and began the mental exercise of identifying which conversations were worth inserting himself into and which ones he could avoid entirely. It wasn't a hostile assessment. It was just efficient. He had been in rooms like this his entire adult life, and they all operated the same way, everyone performing a version of themselves designed for maximum social return, every interaction a small negotiation. He noticed the woman in the pale blue dress because she was the only person in the room who wasn't performing anything. She was moving with the kind of focus you saw in people who had a job to do and no interest in being noticed doing it. There was something careful about her, not timid exactly but contained, like she had learned to take up as little space as possible and had gotten very good at it. He watched her replace a near-empty tray with a full one, exchange a quiet word with a hotel staff member, then step back against the wall and check her clipboard. He looked around the room and then back at her. She was the only person holding a clipboard. The moment happened near the middle of cocktail hour. A cluster of guests had gathered near the entrance to the dining area, for women, the kind who knew each other well enough to be sharp in front of each other. Pamela was among them. Wren had been crossing the room to check on the seating cards when Pamela caught her arm. Actually, before you do that, the coat check is overwhelmed. Go help them. She said it clearly with the smile already deployed, so that anyone nearby heard a woman managing logistics and not a woman dispatching her stepdaughter to a coat closet at her own family's event. One of the other women glanced at Wren with polite curiosity. Is she one of the event staff? Pamela laughed. Oh no, she's family. In the loose sense. A beat just long enough. Wren is my late husband's daughter from before we were married. She helps out. It's sweet, really? The women nodded and returned to their conversation. Wren stood there for exactly 2 seconds longer than she should have. Then she turned and walked toward the hallway. She was almost at the coat room when she heard footsteps behind her. Not fast, not urgent, just steady, and then someone fell into step beside her. She glanced over. It was him. The man from the entrance. Up close he was more composed than she'd expected, which was saying something because from across the room he had already seemed fairly composed. You're leaving the party to collect coats, he said, like he was reading something mildly interesting off a page. At your own stepsister's engagement. Wren looked at him. Stepsister, she said, and she wasn't sure why she corrected that part specifically, except that it felt important to be accurate. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was in the vicinity of one. He stopped walking. She stopped a step later, because the hallway suddenly felt like it had shifted direction without her. Come back inside, he said. I have to. The coat room has staff. He looked at her with the particular patience of someone who was not going to be argued with easily. You don't work here. Tonight I sort of do. Tonight you're a guest, he said. Whether anyone in that room has noticed or not. She stared at him. He was already turning back toward the ballroom. What happened next took less than 2 minutes and rearranged the entire social geometry of Pamela Calloway's carefully orchestrated evening. Reid walked back into the ballroom with Wren beside him. Not by her side in a pointed way, just near her, casually, the way two people walk when they have somewhere to be together. He moved toward the cluster of guests near the dining entrance, where Pamela was still holding court with her careful smile, and he inserted himself into the group the way powerful people do, without asking permission, without announcing himself, simply arriving and allowing the room to reorganize around his presence. He greeted Wren in front of all of them. He said her name, the right name, her full name, with the easy familiarity of someone who had known her for a long time, though she had told him nothing and he had simply used what he'd overheard in that hallway 2 minutes ago. He asked if she'd had a chance to look at the table arrangements. He mentioned, to no one in particular, that she had a good eye for event details. It was a performance and she knew it was a performance, but it was so smoothly executed that even she almost believed it. Pamela's smile stayed in place. But something behind her eyes went very, very still. The other women recalibrated instantly. The woman who had asked whether Wren was staff smiled at her now with genuine warmth and introduced herself. Wren shook her hand and said something appropriate, her heart knocking steadily against her ribs, and she did not look at Reid directly because she was certain that if she did she would somehow ruin whatever this was. When the group dispersed a few minutes later, Wren found a moment of quiet near the edge of the room and stood there with her champagne glass and her bewilderment. Reid appeared beside her. "Who are you?" she asked. He looked at her with genuine curiosity. "You don't know? Should I?" He considered that for a moment. Most people spend a significant amount of time and money just to get the kind of introduction I just gave you for free. Wren turned this over. "I'm sorry. I don't really follow powerful people. He looked at her for a beat that lasted just slightly longer than comfortable. That's either very innocent or very insulting. Probably both, she said, and then immediately wondered where that had come from, because she didn't usually say things like that to strangers, especially strangers who had just done her an unrequested favor in a room full of people. Reid said nothing. But this time the thing at the corner of his mouth was definitely a smile. He stayed nearby for the rest of the evening. Not close enough to make it obvious. Not far enough that she stopped noticing. He handed her a drink once without asking what she wanted, and it turned out to be exactly what she would have asked for if anyone had thought to ask. He stepped between her and a guest who had been talking over her for several minutes, redirected the conversation with 2 sentences, and left the man no reasonable way to continue. He did none of it dramatically. There were no speeches, no grand gestures. He was simply present in a way that made people adjust. Wren kept waiting for him to want something in return. She watched for the ask. She was used to favors arriving with terms attached. He didn't seem to want anything. She didn't know what to do with that. The night ended. Guests filed out in small groups, valets brought cars around, and Brooke stood near the exit accepting congratulations with both hands extended like a woman who had been waiting her whole life to stand exactly there. Pamela found Wren near the coat check, where she had eventually ended up anyway, and pulled her gently aside by the elbow. The smile was gone. What replaced it was quieter and considerably more precise. "Don't embarrass this family," she said. "Not with a man like that. You don't know what you're attaching yourself to, and you don't have the standing to recover from a mistake at that level." Wren said nothing. Pamela released her arm and walked back toward Brooke. The car home was quiet. The house, when she arrived, was dark in the specific way that meant the alarm had already been set for the night. The family side alarm, the one that covered the primary entrance and the main wing. Her keycard didn't work. She tried it twice. The light blinked red both times. She stood in the side entrance with her small bag and her clipboard and her pale blue dress, and she understood, in the way you understand something you have been half expecting for a long time, that her things had already been moved. They were by the service entrance. One bag. Everything she had brought to this house when her father died, and Pamela had offered her a room with the particular generosity of someone who intended to collect on it eventually. She sat down on the steps. It was late. The street was quiet. She had her phone, $42, and a list of college friends she hadn't spoken to in over a year. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. A single message. The Aldrin. Lobby. Ask for Marcus. You have 20 minutes before I change my mind about this being a generous offer. She looked up from the screen. Reid's car was idling at the curb. She stared at it for a long moment. She thought about the $42. She thought about the red keycard light. She thought about Pamela's smile and the coat room and the way the woman at the party had looked right through her before Reid said her name. She picked up her bag. She walked toward the car. The Aldrin was the kind of building that didn't need a sign out front. It simply existed at the end of a quiet block in the way that very expensive things exist, without apology, without explanation, assuming you already knew what it was. Wren didn't know what it was. She walked into the lobby with her one bag and her pale blue dress and the specific expression of someone trying very hard to look like they belonged somewhere they had never been. The lobby was marble and low light and a particular silence that felt designed. A man was already waiting near the reception desk, shorter than Reid, with a watchful face and the kind of stillness that suggested he had been in much more complicated rooms than this one. He looked at her bag. He looked at her face. He said his name was Marcus, and then he walked her to the elevator without asking any questions, which she appreciated more than she could have explained. The penthouse took up the entire top floor. Marcus opened the door, told her the guest room was the second door on the left, told her there was food in the kitchen if she needed it, and then stepped back into the elevator with the quiet efficiency of a man who had done this kind of thing before and had long since stopped finding it unusual. Wren stood in the middle of the living room alone. It was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides, the city spread out below like something decorative. Everything in the space was expensive and impersonal in the specific way of a place that had been designed rather than lived in. Clean lines, no clutter, nothing soft anywhere except a single dark blanket folded over the arm of the couch that looked like someone had actually used it. Reid came out of a hallway on the far side of the room. He had taken off his jacket. He looked at her standing there with her bag and said nothing for a moment. "You can stay until you have somewhere better to be," he said. Wren set her bag down. "Why are you doing this?" He considered her question with the patience of someone who found it only mildly interesting. "I'm not doing anything particular. You needed a room and I have rooms." Those 2 facts lined up conveniently. He walked past her toward the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and disappeared back down the hallway. Wren stood there a moment longer. Then she found the second door on the left and went to sleep in the nicest bed she had ever been in, still wearing her dress, because she was too tired to think about what any of this meant. 3 days passed. She was careful in the way she had always been careful in other people's spaces. Quiet in the mornings, clean in the kitchen, present only when presence was unavoidable. She kept her bag mostly packed out of a habit she hadn't examined closely enough to dismantle. Reid came and went at hours that had no visible pattern. He left early some mornings and returned late at night, and occasionally he didn't leave at all but worked from a room she hadn't been inside. He was not unkind to her. He was also not particularly interested in her, or at least that was how it read from the outside. Focused, contained, operating at a frequency that had very little room for houseguests. She found the kitchen on the second morning and made coffee. She used the mug on the left side of the cabinet, which turned out to be his specific mug, a fact she discovered when he came in 20 minutes later, saw the cabinet, and stood there for a beat with an expression that wasn't quite irritation but was in that general neighborhood. She apologized immediately. He told her it was a mug. She apologized again, which was the wrong move, and she knew it was the wrong move while she was doing it, but the over-apologizing was a reflex she had been building for 3 years inside Pamela's house, and it didn't switch off cleanly. Reid looked at her for a moment with something she couldn't read. Then he poured his coffee into a different mug and left the room. On the fourth day she found a shelf of books in the living room that had been arranged with no visible logic. Financial texts next to literary novels next to what appeared to be 3 separate books about the history of cartography. She started reorganizing them by subject without thinking about it, the way she would have done in her father's study, working quietly for almost an hour. When Reid came through the room that evening he stopped. He looked at the shelf. He looked at her. He said absolutely nothing and walked away, but she noticed that the next morning the cartography books had been moved back to their original spot between the novels, and she made a private decision to leave the rest of the shelf exactly as she'd arranged it. Marcus came by the penthouse on the 5th afternoon and sat at the kitchen island drinking coffee while Wren worked on a job application at the far end of the counter. He was pleasant and unhurried, and he asked her easy questions about herself in the practiced way of someone gathering information so smoothly that it didn't feel like gathering. At some point he said, without particular emphasis, "He doesn't usually let people stay here." Wren looked up. "I got that impression." Marcus nodded slowly. "He's not going to say anything about it directly. Just so you know what you're working with." She wasn't sure what to do with that, so she went back to her application. That evening she heard Marcus say something to Reid in the hallway. She didn't catch the words, only the tone, which was dry and faintly entertained. And then Reid said flatly that Marcus could mind his own business. And Marcus said something else. And Reid said nothing after that, which she was beginning to understand was the sound of Reid losing an argument he refused to acknowledge. She kept her eyes on her laptop screen and did not smile, mostly. Her father's photograph was on the nightstand in her room. Small, slightly creased at one corner, the two of them at a park somewhere years ago before the remarriage and the slow disappearance of everything he had built. She had carried it through every stage of the last 3 years the way you carry something that still belongs to the life he used to have. Reid saw it once. He had knocked on her open door to tell her Marcus would be out front early in the morning if she needed anything. He glanced at the nightstand, saw the photo, and his eyes held it for just a moment before he looked away. He didn't ask about it. He just left. But the next morning there was a cup of coffee on the kitchen counter with a small note from Marcus that said his preference, not mine, and the coffee was made exactly the way she liked it, which she had mentioned to no one. The document arrived on a Tuesday. Marcus brought it in a plain folder and set it on Reid's desk without a word. Reid opened it, read the first page and was quiet for a long time. The name at the top of the document was Pamela Calloway. What it described was a meeting, several months ago before the engagement party, before Wren had any reason to think about property law or territorial disputes or the particular ways that money moves through arrangements designed to keep certain names off certain paperwork. Pamela had made contact with a group of associates connected to a man named Farrell, someone Reid had been managing around for 2 years, a figure who operated in the same legal gray zones that Reid occupied, but with considerably less discipline and considerably more appetite. What Pamela had offered them was access. Not to herself. Not to the house or the estate, or any of the assets she had spent 3 years carefully consolidating under her own name. She had offered them Wren. More specifically, she had offered them a property that Wren's father had registered in Wren's name before he died, a commercial building on the east side of the city, unassuming, easy to overlook, sitting on a block that Farrell's people needed for a development play that wasn't entirely legal. The property was worth a specific amount of money on paper and considerably more than that in terms of what it unlocked structurally. Pamela had told Farrell's people that Wren would sign it over, that she could be managed, that it was just a matter of getting her isolated from anyone who might advise her otherwise. Wren was sitting in Reid's penthouse. Reid set the folder down. He became quieter around her after that. More controlled, in the specific way of a person managing something they haven't decided how to handle yet. She felt the shift the way you feel weather changing. Nothing dramatic, just a change in pressure. She assumed she had overstayed. She started looking at sublets on her laptop in the evenings, cheap ones, places that would take a month-to-month arrangement while she got her footing. She was on the third page of listings on a Wednesday night when Reid came into the living room, saw her screen, and crossed the room and closed her laptop with one hand. Not hard. Just closed it. She looked up at him. "You're not leaving yet," he said. Wren felt something settle in her chest that she didn't want to examine. "You don't get to keep deciding things for me. You've been doing that since the first night and I've let it go because I didn't have a better option, but I'm not a situation for you to manage." He looked at her for a moment. Something shifted behind his eyes, not softening exactly but adjusting. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He told her enough. Not everything but enough for the shape of it to be clear. He told her about the property. He told her about her father's registration. He explained, in plain language with no unnecessary detail, what Pamela had arranged and who she had arranged it with and what those people would want from Wren once they made contact. Wren listened without interrupting. She was very still. When he finished she was quiet for a long time, looking at the middle distance somewhere past his shoulder. Then she said quietly, "She never wanted my father's money. She wanted mine." Reid didn't answer that. He let it land. After a moment Wren looked at him directly. "Why does it matter to you what happens to me? You didn't know me 3 weeks ago. You don't owe me anything." He held her gaze. He seemed to be deciding something, and she had the impression it was a decision he found mildly inconvenient. "It doesn't matter," he said. "Except that it does. And I'm still figuring out which one of those is actually true." She looked at him. He looked back. There was no music, no dramatic pause, just two people sitting at a kitchen table at 11 at night with a difficult conversation between them and no clean way out of it. She nodded slowly. He got up and made them both tea, which she had not expected, and they sat there for another hour and talked about other things entirely. It was a Thursday night when it happened. Reid was at the dining table with paperwork spread across half of it, working in the way he worked, methodical, quiet, occasionally moving one document to a different position like he was solving something spatial. Wren couldn't sleep. She came out in the dark and stood at the window because the city at this hour was different. Slower, the lights less aggressive, something almost manageable about it. She heard him set down his pen. She didn't turn around. But a few minutes later he was standing near her, close enough that she was aware of him, looking out at the same city. "What does it look like to you?" she asked. He thought about it. "Manageable," he said. She almost laughed. "It looks really loud from here. Even now." She paused. "Like everyone is moving towards something and I'm just watching the movement." He said nothing for a moment. She could feel him looking at her instead of the window. He opened his mouth. She heard the breath of it. And then he closed it again, and the thing he hadn't said sat between them like something physical. She turned first. She looked at him for exactly as long as she could manage, which wasn't long. "Good night," she said and walked back to her room. He stood at the window alone. She knew this because she heard him there, still, quiet, for a long time after she closed her door. The second event was a Friday evening fundraiser, the kind of high society gathering that functioned primarily as a place for people with overlapping interests to confirm those interests while holding drinks. Pamela was there. Of course she was there. She moved through the room and practiced arcs, playing the role of the composed widow who had managed difficulty with grace, which was a performance she had been refining for 3 years. She was mid-conversation near the bar when Reid walked in. With Wren. Not beside him as an afterthought. Beside him as a clear and deliberate fact. Wren was in a black dress she had bought 2 days ago when Reid had sent Marcus to tell her there was a car available and a card if she needed it, which she had argued about for 10 minutes before practicality won. She looked like herself, quiet, attentive, but she was standing straight in a way she didn't always stand, and there was something different in her face. Something that had been absent for a long time. Pamela began to move toward them with her smile already assembled. Marcus appeared at her left before she reached them. He handed her an envelope. She took it with the automatic grace of a woman who handled social interactions on reflex, and opened it with the expectation of an invitation or a correspondence. What was inside was legal paperwork. Several pages of it. Filed, stamped, dated 3 days ago. Her father's building. Transferred properly, legally, irrevocably into Wren's name with all the documentation that Pamela had spent 3 years quietly suppressing, now surfaced, verified, and witnessed. Pamela looked up. Reid was watching her from across the room with the specific expression of a man who has already finished a conversation before the other person knew it began. Then he turned to the small cluster of guests beside him. People who mattered in this room, people whose names appeared on boards and in papers, people Pamela had spent years carefully cultivating, and he said, clearly enough to carry, "This is Wren Calloway. Arthur Calloway's daughter." A brief pause. She's exactly who she's always been. The guests turned toward Wren with the warm recognition of people meeting someone they should have known about already. Hands were extended. Names were exchanged. Someone mentioned her father with genuine respect. Pamela stood 12 feet away holding the envelope. She had nothing left to say. So she said nothing. They came back to the penthouse late. The city was quiet below the windows. Wren's black dress was hanging on the back of her door and she was in the kitchen in ordinary clothes, making tea without thinking about it, and it occurred to her that she had stopped feeling like a guest somewhere around the middle of the second week without noticing. Reid came into the kitchen and stopped when he saw the dress hanging through the open doorway. He looked at it for a moment. It wasn't ugly, he said. She looked at him. The dress from the engagement party. The blue one. He said it simply with no particular weight to it. It wasn't ugly. She just needed you to think it was. Wren was quiet for a moment. You knew that from the beginning? I know people who need other people small, he said. It's how they stay large. She looked at him across the kitchen. He looked back. No dramatic pause, no swelling feeling. Just two people standing in a quiet room at the end of a long month, both of them knowing something they hadn't said out loud and neither of them particularly in a hurry to ruin it by saying it. She handed him his mug. The right one this time. He took it. He didn't ask her what her plans were. He didn't mention the guest room or the arrangement or the practical question of what came next. He just stood there in his kitchen drinking his coffee, in the specific peace of a man who has stopped pretending he wants someone to leave. And Wren stayed. Not because she had nowhere else to go. This time she stayed because she wanted to.
If you enjoy these stories, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It really helps more than you might think.